When people think of Los Angeles, they think of the glitz, the glamour, the stardom. But there's a dark side to Los Angeles. My name is Barry Tellis, and I'm a retired homicide detective from the Los Angeles Police Department. This is a dangerous, dangerous town. There are predators, con men, people who pretend to be someone they're not. And those are the people who prey on the innocent.
Christy Giles and Hilda Marcella Cabrales were two young women in their 20s. They were new friends, and then together, they're sort of getting to know each other and enjoy LA and everything it has to offer. I'm Mary Fulginiti, and I'm a former prosecutor and defense attorney. Hilda Marcella Cabrales just moved from Mexico, and she's loving Los Angeles.
She was looking for the American dream, I guess. I was Marcela's best friend. I think it was a dream for her to be there and being able to do what she loved, being an architect and an interior designer.
Aloha!
My wife, Christy, was a model. She was going out for shoots all the time, and she traveled the world doing that and having amazing experiences. She was the most fun and interesting person I'd ever met.
She didn't live inside society's box.
Definitely not. She was a very free spirit.
They're two gorgeous girls who are not only pursuing their careers, but also wanting to have fun at the same time. And they do what a lot of kids do in their 20s. They go out. And they party.
Christy's plan for the evening was to go out with some friends and have a fun night. They went to go see one of their favorite DJs at this event in East LA.
Seems like a weird place to have a party.
Well, it's a warehouse, and we have warehouse parties all over Los Angeles. And they just have music, drugs, alcohol, and people. And this is a target-rich environment for victims of predators.
So they met a man who passed himself off as a big shot Hollywood producer, and that just clearly wasn't the case.
And it was just dumb luck that they met him. He doesn't care about other people.
The longer and longer I didn't hear back, asking her if she's okay, the more worried I got.
We were just waiting for some news, any news.
And at that point, like, I'm in raw panic.
Once they left that party, that was the last time their loved ones ever heard from them again.
Hilda Marcela Plasencia, a doctor in Durango, Mexico, was used to handling medical emergencies. But nothing prepared her for the call she got about her eldest daughter and namesake. Hilda Marcela Cabrales.
I received a phone call in the middle of the night saying that she was so ill. She was very bad. She was intubated.
The 26-year-old architect was fighting for her life in the ICU at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Los Angeles.
Yes.
You are a doctor. What was going on in your mind at the time?
What happened? What happened to her? Why is she that bad?
Another mother in Corner, Alabama, was also getting shattering news. Dusty Giles' daughter, Christy, was in the ER at a completely different Los Angeles hospital. the Southern California Medical Center.
I was just told, I'm very sorry to inform you, Miss Giles, but she was dropped off at our hospital on the outside, kind of like a bag of garbage. And she didn't make it. And I said, what do you mean she didn't make it? They said, it is now a police matter. I hung up and I fell apart.
Christy, who had just turned 24, was dead of a drug overdose. But when detectives heard how she was dropped off, they immediately suspected foul play. Hospital staff told investigators a black Prius without license plates pulled up here to the ER entrance. Two men told the staff they found the woman, quote, passed out on the curb somewhere nearby, and were trying to be good Samaritans by bringing her to the hospital. They left without giving their names or phone numbers.
It was appalling to me.
Barry Tellis, a former Los Angeles Police Department homicide detective and CBS News consultant, says nothing about that story made sense.
Nobody just drops somebody off and say, hey, by the way, we were driving down the street, we found this girl passed out on the sidewalk.
It was an unfathomable ending to a life bursting with exuberance.
When Christy came into her room, she was like a tornado.
Let's do some donuts!
Her personality was big, it was loud. You just couldn't help but love her for it.
Her big sister, Misty Weldon, says life for Christy was one big adventure.
There was nothing in the world that she was afraid to do. Christy went skydiving.
Yeah, how was that, huh?
Christy rode camels in Morocco. We rode donkeys around the Grand Canyon.
When not out adventuring, Christy was traveling the world as a high-fashion model for Wilhelmina. The one-time soccer star traded in her cleats for a pair of heels at the age of 15. She ultimately made LA her home.
Christy Giles, I live in Venice, California, and I am an artist.
At 21, her life took a dramatic turn.
I got a text message from her that said, I did something, don't tell mom. I thought, oh no, what has she done? And I got a text message that said, I got married. And I thought, to who?
To a South African-born artist, photographer, and special effects editor, 17 years her senior, named Jan Cillier. They met through friends at an art gallery in LA.
I understand that before all of this, you were not the marrying type.
Don't know where you heard that, but it's true. Once I was with her, it was different.
Jan planned to pop the question just 7 months after meeting at the Burning Man Arts Festival in the Nevada desert. But in the moment, they figured, why wait?
Instead, we just decided to elope. We just got married right there.
Christy's mom and dad, Leslie, never expected to hear their daughter's name in the same sentence as elope and Burning Man. Needless to say, it did not go over well.
Christy, I can't believe you've done this. Your dad didn't even get to walk you down the aisle. And she goes, oh, no. We got married, but we are full on having a wedding in Alabama.
The newlyweds came to Alabama, and Christy and her mom found the perfect wedding dress to wear at a later date. Back in LA, Christy started studying interior design, which led to a new friendship with Hilda Marcella. Hilda was an architect from Mexico who had just moved to LA to start her dream job in interior design.
Do you remember when she said she wanted to go to Los Angeles, and how did you feel when she told you that?
I feel very happy for her, but very sad for me because we are very close.
Luis Cabrales checked in with his daughter every day she was in LA.
Message, daughter, I miss you. I miss you too. Father never told me daddy, always told me father.
no one was surprised that the summa cum laude graduate of the prestigious university in Monterrey, Mexico, was thriving in LA. Fernanda Cantasani and Alain Betancourt, who call her Marcela or Marce, were two of her closest friends in Monterrey.
She always gave her 100% in everything she did, in her friendships, with her family, with her job, with herself too.
She had already lived in South Korea and traveled the world.
How many countries in all?
22 countries.
22 countries. For such a young girl.
She was very determined. She also knew how to have a good time.
She loved to dance. She loved to dress up. Every single person that met her loved Marcela.
Including her dog, a Weimaraner named Tomas.
Tomas.
She left him with Alain when she moved to LA, but planned to call for him when she got her bearings. That call would never come. Just 4 months after moving to LA, Hilda was in a coma. Her life in the balance, her frantic parents and sister Fernanda racing to her side.
And I thought, when we are there, things will change. She will wake up.
This Hilda Marcela, the vibrant young architect who loved laughing with friends, traveling the world with her sister.
Oh, you're in the balloon here.
Yeah, we are inside the balloon.
And playing with her dog Tomas, looked nothing like the Hilda Marcela her family saw when they arrived at the hospital in Los Angeles.
My heart broke in 1,000 pieces because I saw my baby unconscious. I'm fighting for her life.
I said, is this real? Am I dreaming? I took her hand and I said, Mom's here with you. You're not alone.
I was very shocked, very impressed. I never expected looking at her like this.
Like Christy, Hilda had suffered a drug overdose. Toxicology reports would later reveal that she had cocaine, MDMA or ecstasy, and elevated levels of fentanyl in her system. But her friends and family were sure that this early-to-bed, early-to-rise, health-conscious young woman would never have willingly taken such a toxic cocktail of drugs.
When you heard overdose, you immediately thought drugged.
Yeah, drugged. I was sure someone did this to her.
When you were told that the cause of death was an overdose, did that add up to you?
Absolutely not. Definitely not something that she would have done to herself ever. That's just not her.
Christy's autopsy showed she had cocaine, fentanyl, and GHB, known as the date rape drug, in her system. In the hours and days after Christy's death, Jan was determined to get the truth.
I wanted to get to the bottom of exactly what happened that night.
Jan began putting the puzzle pieces together, starting on the evening of Friday, November 12, 2021, the night of the warehouse party. He made a timeline based on what he knew about Christy's plans, conversations with Christy's friends, and the digital trail she left behind. Jan, who had gone to San Francisco to visit his dad, says Christy spent the early evening doing what she loved most.
She was enjoying a lovely sunset. She took our cat for a walk on the beach.
Sand Panther, oh, whoa.
Those were the last pictures she sent me of herself. And she said, I wish you were here, and I will forever wish that I was there too.
Christy, Hilda, and a friend who does not want to be identified had planned a girls' night out. They kicked it off at the Soho House in West Hollywood, then moved on to a warehouse party after midnight where these photos were taken. This cell phone video posted on social media shows Hilda and Christy dancing in the VIP section.
In an area which is more protected and safer to be in.
By then, Jan had gone to bed. When he woke up the next morning, it was now Saturday, November 13th, he saw that Christy had texted him.
I texted her back and sort of didn't hear anything from her.
At first, he just assumed she was sleeping in. But after a few hours with no word, he noticed something strange. They shared locations on their phones.
I saw that she was at a location that I didn't recognize.
Her phone was located at 8641 West Olympic Boulevard.
So a little orange flag at the back of your head. I still hadn't heard back from her, and I saw her location had suddenly moved to a hospital. I called the hospital. They told me that she was in the emergency room, and at that point, I'm in raw panic.
Jan raced to the airport to catch a flight back to LA.
I called her parents, let them know that something terrible had happened and that she's in the emergency room. And then her mom called the emergency room and called me back probably 5 minutes later, letting me know that Christy had passed away.
In less than 24 hours, your world was turned upside down.
Shattered.
Jan went straight to the hospital. Christy and Hilda's friend, who had been at the warehouse party with them but left early, was already here. She had been desperately trying to get in touch with Hilda, but could not reach her. They were about to find out why.
She got a call from a different hospital 2 hours later saying that Hilda was just checked in there. And then, obviously, all our alarm bells are going off in our heads when both girls are dropped off at two different hospitals 2 hours apart. Something terrible happened that night. When people
And Jan believed whatever happened took place at that mysterious address on Olympic Boulevard. He put it on Instagram, asking for help.
You blast out this address, and very quickly you get responses.
Yeah.
What are those responses?
That there's somebody that lives at this location that is a very unsavory person, that there's a lot of stuff out on the internet about him.
His name was David Pierce. Hilda and Christy were believed to have met him for the first time at the warehouse party.
David Pierce flew under the radar for a long time.
But his past was about to catch up with him as he faces serious charges, says former prosecutor Mary Fulgeniti.
So at best, a con man. At worst,
A criminal, a sexual predator, a drug dealer,
a murderer?
a murderer.
As Hilda Marcella lay in a hospital bed fighting for her life in LA, Dusty and Leslie Giles were preparing to bury their daughter, Christy, in Alabama. Half her ashes would go to Jan to scatter in the places they loved. Dusty placed the rest in an urn inside a butterfly box and gently wrapped it in the wedding dress she never had the chance to wear.
It was important because I know how happy she was when she found it. She swirled like a princess, literally, in it.
Within hours of Christy's death, detectives on the case were following clues from Christy herself. Her pinging phone had led them straight to the apartment of this man, David Pierce, 8641 West Olympic Boulevard.
Police drive over there. Oh my God, there's the car. Boom, there's the car. Same car.
Tellis says police believed it was the same black Prius with no license plates that dropped Christy off at the hospital.
And it's like, okay, I think we have our man.
They retraced the movements of the women that night, which would become the basis of a police affidavit. When they combed through those pictures from the party at the warehouse, there was David Pierce with Hilda, partying it up in the VIP section.
It sounds like VIP access gave David Pierce instant credibility.
Absolutely. It's all part of the manipulation. He must be a good guy. He's in the VIP section.
It was likely all part of a plan to meet women, a plan that included drugs, says the retired detective.
Based on the witnesses' statements and the police investigation, David Pierce comes with a bag of cocaine, an ounce estimated. And David Pierce came here to share it with whoever he could meet.
According to Tellis, cocaine is a hot ticket at these parties, at least on that night, even for Hilda and Christy. The police recovered this text exchange between the two women starting at 4:21 a.m. while still at the warehouse party. "Do you want coke?" asks Hilda. "Yes," replies Christy. Hilda texted back, "I'm in the kitchen, let's do a line." According to the police affidavit, a witness observed Pierce provide what looked like cocaine to Giles and Cabrales, who consumed it. Police say half an hour later, this surveillance video obtained by 48 Hours shows Hilda and Christy leaving with David Pierce and two other men, his roommate Brant Osborne and their friend, photographer Michael Ansbach. They all get into Osborne's car. At 5:11 a.m., according to the police affidavit, surveillance video, which has not been released because of the ongoing investigation, shows Osborne's car arriving here in front of the apartment. According to the affidavit, several people got out of the vehicle and headed to the entrance of the residence. 19 minutes later, at 5:30 a.m., Christy sends from inside Pierce's apartment a wide-eyed emoji text to Hilda saying, "Let's go." Hilda replies, "I'll call an Uber," 10 minutes away. 13 minutes later, according to the affidavit, a car believed to be the Uber pulls up. After waiting 5 minutes, it drives away without Christy and without Hilda.
How did you process that?
I mean, it's just confirming my worst fears again, that they were there at that place against their will. They didn't want to be there. They wanted to leave.
Mary Fulgeniti, a former federal prosecutor and defense attorney and CBS News consultant, has reviewed the police affidavit and court documents. She says this text is an important piece of evidence.
Something or someone stopped them in their tracks because they never got out and they never left.
No one knows exactly what went on inside that apartment for the next 13 hours. But according to the affidavit, a neighbor heard someone in pain and moaning on and off during the hours of 10:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. For reasons not known, the neighbor did not call police.
She's clearly in a distressed state that everyone seems to just be ignoring. And when I say everyone, not just Pierce or Osborne, but there's a third individual that appears to have been at that apartment, at least for part or all of the night, and that's Michael Ansbach.
Whatever happened inside the apartment was hidden from public view. Not so outside the apartment. Another key piece of evidence, images captured on security cameras.
But the cameras are in the adjacent building, right next door, pointing right in this direction.
Although Tellis has not seen the video, the police affidavit describes it in detail. At 4:19 in the afternoon, 11 hours after they'd arrived at the apartment, Pierce and Osborne are caught on camera carrying Christy down the back stairs.
It shows Pierce exit the door, the back door, looks in both directions, making sure the coast is clear, making sure there's not going to be any witnesses that sees me carrying this body to my car.
Both men get into the Prius. According to the affidavit, the men are captured on security cameras trying to disguise themselves.
You see them putting on a hat, a mask, and a hoodie, and then they drive away and they drive to a hospital, Southern California Medical Center.
Shortly after, according to police, Ansbach leaves the residence carrying bags of unknown items. Pierce and Osborne return to the apartment to get Hilda. They carry her partially clad body out to the Prius.
And again, they leave. They don't go to the same hospital, they go to a different hospital, Kaiser Permanente.
Why not bring them at the same time to the same hospital?
Who knows? They're trying to conceal their actions. They're trying to keep the police at bay, and they don't want to hit the radar.
And they do the same thing. They drop the body, they tell the same story, and then they take off without leaving their name, their phone number, or anything to identify themselves with.
And Hilda, what is her state at this point?
Hilda was still alive. They got her to the hospital, and she was declared what we call brain dead.
How did you process that when you heard that news?
The worst day of my life.
After almost 2 weeks on life support, it was time for Hilda Marcella's family to say goodbye.
Hilda, what were your final moments with your daughter?
They were so hard, you know. And I just was asking God to not let her suffer more.
I remember telling her that you can leave. And just thanking her for being my sister.
I told her, maybe when I pass away, I will see you again. And I give you a big hug, a kiss.
The family decided to donate Hilda Marcella's organs. Her mom remembers the medical staff lining the halls as the family accompanied Hilda to the OR.
The medical team was clapping to honor her, to say thank you for giving life to others.
Hilda Marcela Cabrales was pronounced dead 1 day before her 27th birthday. Back in Monterrey, Mexico, her friends gathered to remember her, all dressed in white, at her favorite park.
We brought her favorite thing to drink and her favorite cake. At first we were crying, but at some point we put her favorite music on. And we just started dancing and we were laughing and hugging, and it was beautiful. I felt like she was there.
3 weeks after Hilda's death, a break in the case.
Police have arrested 3 men in connection with the deaths of a model and her friend last month.
David Pierce, 39, Brant Osborne, 42, and Michael Ansbach, 47, were arrested in connection to Hilda and Christy's deaths, but not officially charged. Osborne on the left and Ansbach were eventually released, but not Pierce. He was held on 4 unrelated sexual assault charges.
New tonight, a Beverly Hills man has been charged with sexually assaulting 4 different women.
When this case hit the media, more victims showed up. I know that guy, he did this to me.
The prosecution is alleging, in cases dating back to 2010, that Pierce lured 4 different Jane Does to his apartment and gave all but one a special drink, causing them to get dizzy or black out.
The allegations include forcible rape, sexual penetration with a foreign object, having sex with someone who's unconscious.
Erica Bergman, who also goes by Erica Poe, is not one of the Jane Does, but she says she was so traumatized by Pierce, she tried to warn other women about him on a blog called The Dirty as far back as 2013. She discovered she had a lot of company.
There's a lot of commonalities in our stories.
Erica says she met Pierce at a low point in her life. She was getting a divorce and money was tight. Initially, she says she was taken in by him.
He would talk a lot about celebrities that he knew and introduce himself as a producer for Paramount Pictures. So he was really larger than life kind of personality.
But she says it didn't take long for her to realize that Pierce, who often introduced himself as Dave from Paramount Pictures, lied. He never worked at the movie studio.
David Pierce is a very bad person.
Erica believes that one night he drugged her. She slept till 4 p.m. the next day and woke up feeling strange and groggy.
And Dave is bouncing around the room kind of laughing and giddy. And he started to tell me how while I was passed out, he had assaulted me while I was sleeping, sexually assaulted me, and the things that he had done to me, and it was incredibly degrading.
Erica says she wanted to leave, but felt trapped. She says he threatened to send compromising pictures to her estranged husband, whom she was battling in divorce court. She reluctantly stayed, but says the violence only got worse.
He slammed my head onto the marble floor, and the sound in my ears was like an egg cracking, and I can't get that sound out of my ears.
Erica says she was too scared to press charges, but soon left for good. Then it all came rushing back when she heard about Christy and Hilda.
My first gut instinct was that this was not an accident, that he had his name all over it.
In May of 2022, the prosecution added 3 more counts of sexual assault against David Pierce.
We've added 3 additional sexual assault charges with 3 additional victims.
And there was more.
40-year-old David Pierce has been charged with murder in connection with the women's deaths.
After a 7-month investigation, the DA had enough evidence to indict David Pierce on 2 counts of murder, claiming David Pierce gave Christy and Hilda lethal amounts of fentanyl, a deadly synthetic opioid drug dealers often mix with other drugs, unbeknownst to the user.
It took months before David Pierce was charged with murder. What was your reaction?
I mean, definitely relief, but also very sad.
The police did not find any fentanyl-laced drugs in Pierce and Osborne's apartment, just drug paraphernalia. But Osborne, who has been charged as an accessory to murder after the fact, may have unwittingly explained why. According to the police affidavit, Osborne told coworkers if cops had found the drugs hidden underneath the cash inside the car, they would have been in big trouble. Not finding fentanyl-laced drugs creates a big challenge for the prosecution, says Fulgeniti.
They're going to have to prove that David Pierce gave the girls these drugs, and he knew at the time that it could harm them, and he did so with conscious disregard. So they're going to have to prove that David Pierce intended to kill these young women, and that's not an easy threshold to overcome.
Especially in light of witness statements that the women were doing drugs willingly, cocaine at the warehouse, and earlier in the evening as well. Friends told police Christy and Hilda both had taken cocaine and ketamine, a popular club drug.
How does this work in the defense's favor?
Because fentanyl is a problem in this country, and people are dying from fentanyl that they take recreationally because they believe that they're only taking cocaine. If you're the defense, that's the point you want to continue to drive home. It's how do you hold these 2 men responsible for an epidemic that's really plaguing the entire country?
That does not mean it will be an easy defense, says Josh Ritter. The former Los Angeles assistant DA is advising Jan on legal issues and is now a practicing defense attorney.
The problems that they're going to have, though, is how do you get around how those girls were treated afterwards? And how do you get around the history that this man has?
And how do you get around the fact that Christy had the so-called date rape drug, GHB, in her system?
Is GHB, is the date rape drug, something these women would have taken knowingly?
Absolutely not. That is a drug that's usually used by sexual predators, guys that want to take advantage of women and don't want them to remember or know about it.
Hilda and Christy were still coherent at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning when they exchanged that text about calling an Uber, the text punctuated with a wide-eyed emoji.
Something happened inside those 10 minutes between them calling the Uber and the Uber leaving that incapacitated them.
According to the timeline in the affidavit, Christy remained in that apartment for the next 11 hours. Hilda for 13, with one of them, according to a neighbor, moaning and groaning in pain most of the day.
These 2 women could still be alive had David Pierce or Mr. Osborne called 911. 3 digits on a phone. That could have changed everything.
If found guilty of all charges against him, David Pierce could face 128 years to life in prison.
What is David Pierce currently charged with?
David Pierce is charged with 11 counts, 7 counts of drugging and sexually assaulting, forcibly raping and or sodomizing several women, 2 counts of murder, and 2 counts of providing a controlled substance, that being fentanyl.
In a bold decision, the state will combine the sexual assault and murder charges in one trial.
Why include sexual assault charges in a murder case?
If you look at this case in its totality, I mean, this is David Pierce's MO. He lures women back to his apartment, he provides them with a drink, and then they start to feel dizzy or they black out and he sexually assaults them.
While Christy and Hilda's autopsy stated there was no physical or sexual trauma, nurses who treated Hilda noted slight bleeding in her vagina, and a review of her sexual assault examination found a small abrasion.
I know this is a difficult conversation. Do you think Hilda and Christy were potentially raped that night?
Of course, I believe that. That's the reason why they drugged them.
Josh Ritter believes the testimony of the women who were allegedly drugged and raped by Pierce will help jurors see a dangerous pattern of behavior.
Their testimony is going to be huge. 1 woman, perhaps the defense can poke holes in that. 2 women, it begins to sound like, is this really a coincidence or not? But 3 or 4 women or more, and you realize you're dealing with a monster.
It turns out David Pierce had been on the police radar for years. According to the police affidavit, he was arrested in 2014 for sexual assault, along with an additional rape case. But these cases are often difficult to prove and were ultimately rejected by the district attorney's office. Something Christy's sister Misty finds unforgivable.
To know that he had been arrested and had been released was just appalling to me. It's really sad that 2 beautiful girls had to die in order for him to be in jail right now.
David Pierce has pleaded not guilty to all charges against him. Brant Osborne, who is charged as an accessory to murder after the fact, has also pleaded not guilty and is out on bail. We caught up with him outside of court.
Do you have any comment?
I have no comment. I'm innocent.
Pierce's lawyer also had no comment, but at the time of the incident, Pierce told detectives, "At the end of the day, I didn't do anything wrong. I just tried to make the situation, right." So far, the prosecution has declined to charge Michael Ansbach. 48 Hours has learned that he's cooperating with prosecutors and will likely testify against his 2 friends. But until the case goes to trial, Dusty and Leslie Giles, thanks to a social media campaign, will be at every court hearing. Never letting David Pierce forget that Christy was more than just a name on a court docket.
She was a real person. She was a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter. She was her daddy's best friend.
I miss my daughter.
We love you.
In Mexico, Hilda Marcela's friends and family cherish the mementos she left behind. A lock of hair.
It's part of her.
A diploma.
So she wasn't just smart, she was the top of her class.
She was the top of the top.
A dog named Tomas, who now lives with Alon.
The love we have for Marce, it's going to Tomas. He reminds us about her so much.
And he has become my emotional support, my emotional fortress. I would be very lost. So, yeah.
There is always and will always be a hole. And nothing can fill it. She loved to live. And I think that's the way we can honor her, living our lives in the best way.
Hilda and Christy's families hope the deaths of these young friends will not be in vain.
She's here!
This is a tragedy, but maybe this was the way to stop them.
That's the only justice we can get.
"48 Hours. Don't miss an episode."
Torrey Pines is a beautiful piece of nature in Southern California. What's beautiful about a beach is also what's dangerous about it. There's a very different vibe of what it feels like to be there in the middle of the day versus 10 at night. There is a little feeling of you don't know exactly what's out there. In 1978, Barbara Nante and Jim Alt decided to go on a camping trip to the beach at Torrey Pines.
Stole my heart the minute I saw her. You know, it's that feeling everyone gets, you know, when you find that person that fits.
They were really good together. They loved each other. They had so much fun together, and you could see it. Barbara, she was outspoken, very popular, funny. Jim, great personality. He was the life of the party. And my sister was like that, too.
Barbara and Jim set up their sleeping bags on the beach itself, and it was sometime in the night after they had fallen asleep that they were attacked. Jim Alt had been beaten and was very severely injured.
I was knocked unconscious. I couldn't protect her. I couldn't defend myself.
My dad looked at me and said, "Your sister's been murdered." I didn't find out till years later how bad it really was.
I'm going to say the body was around this position here somewhere. They found her lying here nude, and she also had some cut marks on one of her breasts.
Who would want to kill her, and why?
6 years later, in 1984, another young woman, Claire Huff, who was 14, was found murdered on Torrey Pines at nearly the identical location.
I just said, don't go down there alone. I think about her just about every day. She was my best friend.
You get to this crime scene, look at the body, and see what?
Again, there was mutilation of the breast. My first thought was, hey, this is very similar to the one that happened 6 years ago.
How much evidence was there? How many leads?
Not any at all, really.
I just remember going crazy in my mind. Is there something I'm not remembering? Is there something I saw?
I want to put a face to this crime because it's been faceless for almost 37 years.
There really was no big break until 2012 when police finally got hits on the DNA evidence that they had from the crime scene.
San Diego police have identified a former San Diego police criminalist as one of two suspects in the 1984 murder of 14-year-old Claire Huff.
It was a big surprise that of all people in the world you could find as a suspect, that it would be somebody who had actually worked for the police department.
He had a nickname in that crime lab, right? You know what that was?
His nickname was Kinky. He liked strip clubs. He liked taking pictures of women.
My husband didn't do it. He didn't go after teenagers. I knew they were wrong.
This has multiple suspects. There are a variety of motives. As a murder mystery, this has everything you would want.
Every morning for the last 37 years, Jim Alt wakes up terrified, thinking that it's 1978, that he's just been brutally attacked on Torrey Pines Beach.
When I become aware that I'm awake, I do not open my eyes. I put my hands on the bed and I feel for that sheet, or I feel for sand of a beach.
You still do that?
Yes, sir. Before my eyes are open, I want to know where I'm at.
It wasn't always this way. The beach used to be Jim's second home, a safe place, a fun place.
And you were a big surfer? Absolutely. There's not a feeling on earth like surfing. It's just there's a big rush inside your body.
Rick Selga has felt that rush. He was one of Jim's good friends back then.
Who was the better surfer between the two of you?
Probably he was.
Do you remember what he was like back then?
He was a big, strong, funny, happy guy. He was probably the guy that everybody looked up to.
And this is probably one reason why. Jim was featured in a wetsuit ad in Surfer magazine.
We were rock stars, yeah, all of us in there. When that magazine, that issue came out, we autographed quite a few.
And he had a lot of girls that liked him, but he didn't see anybody else but her.
Jim Alt only had eyes for 15-year-old Barbara Nantes. They were the all-American couple. Jim, the surfer, had been dating Barbara, the cheerleader, for 9 months.
Man, just a beautiful girl. Brown hair, brown eyes. I was in love with her the minute I saw her.
They were introduced by Barbara's sister, Sue.
She was outspoken, really stubborn, and set in her ways. We had lots of arguments and fights and disagreements, as sisters do.
Barbara's parents, Ralph and Judy Nantes, knew they had their work cut out for them pretty early on.
So she wasn't just another pretty face?
No, she wasn't. She was tough as nails.
She was a popular, defiant, beautiful, pain in the ass, wonderful daughter, you know. God gave her to me to keep me humble, and it worked.
On the weekend of August 12, 1978, Ralph and Judy Nantes left town to visit some friends. A family friend was looking after Barbara and her 3 siblings. Before leaving, Ralph Nantes took Jim Alt aside.
What did you tell him?
Take care of my girl, okay? And make sure that she's safe.
I told her father and mother, you know, that we would stay put. And again, that you know, I've said it before, it's the biggest mistake or the biggest lie I've ever told in my life.
Almost as soon as Barbara's parents left, she and Jim hopped into a station wagon with Rick Selga and his girlfriend, and they all drove off to the beach.
I remember as they pulled off, though, just saying, you guys better be careful, you know, and they're kind of like, yeah, haha. My sister's like, see ya.
The 4 friends eventually ended up at Torrey Pines Beach.
Parking lot was filled with people. It was like a big party.
Around 9:30 p.m., the friends called it a night. Rick and his girlfriend decided to sleep in the station wagon, and Jim and Barbara went down to the beach for some privacy.
I zipped the sleeping bags together and we crawl in them and went to sleep. She was in my arms. That's the last thing I remember.
The next morning, Jim woke up cold and alone and wet. He was covered in blood.
I'm freezing. I'm feeling for Barbara. Don't know where she is. I don't know anything. I can't see anything. Don't hear anything.
He was blinded and disoriented, so Jim had to feel his way along a fence up the sandy hill to the parking lot where his friends were sleeping in the car.
Jim came up here, and he was down low like this, and he rapped on the window.
And what did he look like then?
His face was swollen, blood all over his blonde hair, you know, and his head was probably about that big.
Jim had been savagely beaten with a rock and a log from a fire pit on the beach.
Did he say anything to you?
He goes, "Go find Barb." So I ran down to the beach looking for her, and she was there.
Barbara's nude, lifeless body lay on the beach.
I was thinking, what do I do? I think that I just yelled at some people to call the police.
Homicide officers say what started out as an evening with friends turned out to be a night of death.
Paul Ibarrondo was a sergeant for the San Diego Police Department. He was one of the first investigators on the scene.
When we uncovered the body, it was covered with sand. She has some very severe-looking wounds on her head. Looked like she'd probably been struck with something, perhaps the rocks that we found nearby.
Barbara's murder had been vicious. There was sand in her mouth, and the killer left a gruesome mark.
It appeared that somebody had taken a sharp instrument and cut around the areola of her breast and also around the nipple of the breast.
So she'd been sort of mutilated?
Mutilated. Later on, it was determined that she had been raped and sodomized.
Soon after, Barbara's parents were notified.
And I just started screaming, no, no, no. I must have said it 50 times.
It's like somebody took a sledgehammer and hit me in the head because we didn't even know that the kids were down there. We had no idea.
Jim Alt had been rushed to the hospital. He had suffered a traumatic brain injury and was in a coma for days. When he awoke, he had no memory of the attack.
I've got titanium in the cranium, stainless steel. I've got that plate that runs right about there.
And this was a serious, life-threatening attack.
Yes, sir. I almost did not make it.
Jim was briefly investigated but ruled out as a suspect. His injuries were too severe. Paul Ibarrondo and other investigators tracked down other leads, but police could not find the killer. The bloody attack and murder haunted everyone for years.
They were just kids, you know, that stuff didn't happen.
But a few years later, Claire Huff's body was found on Torrey Pines Beach.
She was murdered identically to Barbara.
Judy and Sue Nantes share their memories of Barbara on Facebook at 48 Hours.
In the years after Barbara Nantes' murder, her family struggled with the overwhelming loss and pain.
There was situations, you know, where I'd wake up in a cold sweat, crying.
Just the sadness at losing this child that you loved. When you're the mom, you just carry that. I felt like I was a complete failure as a mother.
Barbara's parents were both sad and angry at their daughter for lying to them. But Ralph Nantes was especially furious at Jim Alt.
I didn't want to see him and I didn't want to talk to him. That's exactly what I felt. You didn't keep my little girl safe. Yeah, I was very, very upset.
It hurts. I didn't bring their daughter home.
6 years later, Claire Huff's loved ones faced the same pain that originated in the same place. She was like Barbara Nantes, a year younger, just 14, smart and spirited. And she loved the beach.
She just had an inner light, a joy about her. It's hard to explain unless you've met her.
Kim Jamer was Claire Huff's best friend.
Very gentle, funny, kind.
Claire's parents, Sam and Penny Huff, were and are immensely proud of her.
She was the class mediator. Kids who got into arguments would ask Claire to adjudicate.
A couple of times she got in trouble in school because the teacher had accused someone wrongly, and Claire wouldn't put up with it. She fought back.
Claire learned to love the ocean early on. She grew up on the coast of Rhode Island and spent as much time as she could walking along the shore with Kim.
We grew up looking for treasures and bringing her mom pretty things home from the ocean, sea glass and pretty shells.
Claire had also spent a lot of time on San Diego's beaches. Her grandparents lived just a few blocks away from Torrey Pines Beach. One of the first pictures of Claire was taken there.
She was still small enough to be carried. This may be her first introduction to real ocean surf.
The Huffs had always considered it a safe place, and in the summer of 1984, they sent Claire and her brother out to California for a visit with their grandparents. Kim Jamer went along too.
We could just be silly and nobody knew us, and it didn't matter how goofy we got, and it was just really fun.
The night before Kim was supposed to head home, Claire convinced her to sneak out of her grandparents' house and go to the beach after dark. But once they got there and settled near their favorite spot by the bridge, Kim almost immediately had a panic attack.
It was just an awful feeling. I knew how freaked out I was, how somebody could just walk right up and by you without you even knowing they were there.
You asked Claire to make you a promise when you were back at the house. What was the promise?
I just didn't want her sneaking out by herself again.
2 days later, after Kim went back to Rhode Island, Claire broke that promise, and on August 24th, 1984, Claire Huff's body was found by a beachcomber near the bridge. Retired Detective Paul Ibarrando also worked on this case and was interviewed by our CBS local station back then.
We are evaluating all the evidence we recovered at the scene.
Claire had been found just a few hundred yards from where Barbara Nantes had been killed.
To me, it was a lot of similarities there.
Like Barbara Nantes, Claire Huff also had been beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted.
It was determined at the autopsy that this girl had a lot of sand packed in her mouth and larynx area. Our other victim had sand in her mouth.
But perhaps most chilling, like Barbara's, Claire's breast had also been mutilated.
We either have a serial killer or a repeat performance by the person that probably did the first case.
It didn't take long to find a promising suspect. As soon as they heard about their daughter's death, Sam and Penny Huff went to Torrey Pines State Beach. Before long, they were approached by a man named Wallace Wheeler. He was the beachcomber who had found Claire's body.
He said, "I'm Wally Wheeler, I'm a psychic."
With his hand outstretched.
So what did you make of Wally Wheeler, the psychic?
He was strange.
So then we called the police to tell them that.
The police encouraged Claire's parents to keep communicating with Wheeler, thinking he might confess or at least give them some useful information. Wheeler wrote long and rambling letters to the Huffs, one of them saying Claire was coming to him in visions.
That was why she let me see her smiling face, and her eyes were radiant. This is a guy who found a bloody, mutilated body, and he's talking about smiling face and radiant eyes.
The letters were odd, very odd. The police questioned Wheeler, but he never confessed to anything, and the letters eventually stopped.
What was the last thing you heard about Wallace Wheeler?
That he had killed himself.
threw himself off the top of a building, 13-story building, and died.
Investigators would later tell the Huffs that they had ruled Wheeler out as a suspect, but the Huffs were convinced for years that Wheeler was their daughter's killer.
You thought he was involved somehow?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've assumed that Wheeler
He had done it.
For all the intrigue surrounding Wallace Wheeler, the loved ones of the first victim, Barbara Nantes, had never even heard of him at the time. In fact, the families did not even know about each other. But around 2008, the San Diego Police Department posted the cases on its website, and for the first time said publicly that the police believed Claire Huff and Barbara Nantes had likely been murdered by the same killer.
I was mad that it happened to Claire and that we weren't informed.
But who may have been responsible would remain a mystery for 4 more years, until advanced DNA testing revealed 2 suspects, and one of them was one of their own. For decades after the murders of Barbara Nantes and Claire Huff, the San Diego Police Department kept investigating sporadically, but nothing had ever materialized. Claire's friend, Kim Jamer, kept waiting for some news.
Did you think about this case a lot?
All the time. I mean, you know nothing's going to bring your friend back, and you just hope that no one is out there hurting other people.
In 2012, there was finally a promising development. The cases were reopened, investigators hoping advanced DNA technology would change the course of things. It was encouraging for Barbara's parents, Judy and Ralph Nantes.
I was cautiously optimistic.
They would be disappointed. The new DNA test would find nothing useful on their daughter, but Claire Huff's friend, Kim, would soon get a visit from a detective.
He brought several pictures. Did you see any of these people during your trip? I didn't recognize anything.
Kim was given few details, but she had a feeling that investigators were finally onto something.
I was like, finally, somebody's really looking into this.
48 Hours obtained the San Diego Police Department's case affidavits and search warrants. And here's what Kim Jamer didn't know. Police had found 2 DNA hits on Claire Huff. Blood on her jeans was linked to a convicted rapist named Ronald Tatro. The other DNA, a tiny microscopic amount reportedly found inside Claire, was linked to a man named Kevin Brown. Police knew Kevin Brown. He was a former criminalist in their lab.
I was getting ready for work, and there was the knock, and 2 detectives were there.
Rebecca Brown, a Catholic school teacher, had been married to 61-year-old Kevin Brown for more than 20 years. Kevin retired from the San Diego Police Department in 2002.
So I thought, okay, they're talking about some case that he worked on.
The Browns had led a quiet life revolving around church, travel, and their pets before that visit by investigators in January of 2014. The detectives showed Brown a picture of Ronald Tatro and asked if he knew him.
What did he say?
He said, "I've never seen this man. I don't know him."
Journalist James Vlahos wrote about the case in October 2015 for The Atlantic magazine. He is a CBS News consultant.
Did the police go and talk to Ronald Tatro when they found his DNA in Claire Huff's body?
They would have liked to have done that, but Ronald Tatro was already dead.
Tatro had drowned in what was ruled a boating accident in Tennessee in 2011. But to this day, there is suspicion it was a suicide.
His wallet had been placed on the seat, his glasses had been placed on the seat, and they said it looked as if he intended to go into the water. Another thing that certainly raises eyebrows is that his death took place on the anniversary of Claire Huff's murder.
Kevin Brown, the retired criminalist, was now the only living suspect. Police showed him a picture of Claire Huff.
What did he say?
Oh, sure, I remember her.
The detectives told Brown that his DNA had been found in the evidence.
They didn't tell him where or how they found it. The police maintained that it was Kevin who first mentioned the possibility of it being found on a vaginal swab.
The investigation ramped up quickly. That same afternoon, investigators served a search warrant on his property, looking for any evidence related to the murders of both Claire Huff and Barbara Nantes, because they were so similar.
I said, you've got to clear this up. This is crazy. And he said, I tried telling them. I don't know what they're talking about. I never killed anybody in my life. You know that. And I do know that. In my deep core, I know he never killed anybody.
But investigators believed Kevin Brown had a dark side. At the time of Claire Huff's murder, Kevin was a bachelor in his 30s and had a randy reputation at the crime lab.
He had a nickname, Kinky Kevin Brown, and that was because we knew that he frequented strip clubs.
They called him Kinky Kevin?
Yeah, we call it, his nickname was Kinky.
Retired criminalist Jim Stamm and John Dorina worked with Kevin in the lab for years.
Did he brag about going to the strip clubs? I mean, did he make any secret of it?
Early on, I don't think he kept it a secret, but he did have friends that would go with him to either a movie or a strip club, I believe.
He would go to, what, dirty movies?
I believe it was a porn movie, yes.
Dorina and Stamm never saw any inappropriate behavior by Brown in the lab, but he made some female colleagues uncomfortable.
There was a criminalist who worked with Kevin Brown, and she describes how Kevin took a report of a violent rape, and when she was alone in the lab with him, read it aloud to her and made a remark along the lines of, "Isn't that funny?" After that, she never felt comfortable being alone with him in the lab again.
As they dug into Brown's background, investigators learned more about his hobbies. He enjoyed photography, and in the 80s he went to lingerie and boudoir shoots advertised in a local magazine. Photographer Rocky Ferguson took photos of aspiring models with Kevin.
So they posed for the photographer, and in return they get a free picture?
Yes.
But Rocky says that sometimes certain photographers would make arrangements for private sessions that were more racy.
And Kevin did that?
Kevin did his own thing. If he likes somebody, he'll hire his own models.
In these private sessions, what would happen?
Adult type stuff.
Adult stuff,
Yes.
naughty stuff.
Yes, explicit photos.
Kevin Brown's pastimes as a bachelor may have raised detectives' eyebrows, but his statements during the investigation made them even more suspicious. Although he initially denied having actually met Claire Huff, Brown later seemed to make a startling admission.
He had done some thinking, and that he now did recall having met someone named Claire in the 1980s and possibly having sex with her.
And then he got himself into even deeper trouble. According to the affidavit, Kevin Brown volunteered to take a lie detector test. He failed, and after the polygraph, an investigator talked to him about Claire Huff, saying, "I don't believe for a second that you thought she was 14. And Brown reportedly responded, "I had no idea." Then police learned Kevin Brown had called a friend.
And told him, allegedly, "The police are looking at me as a suspect. This girl I photographed on the beach ended up dead."
Ever since investigators got that DNA hit on Claire Huff in 2012, they had been quietly trying to build a case against Kevin Brown. But his wife, Rebecca Brown, stood by him.
But I never thought he was a killer. Never, never. This is a man who didn't have a mean bone in his body.
Well, you know all those things that people are saying about he was going to strip clubs and taking photographs of naked women.
He'd shown me some, and majority were just cutesy poses, glamour shots. And that was back when he was single, and he would have thought, wow, this is great.
If everybody, whoever looked at a photo of a scantily clad woman, or if everybody who ever went to a strip club, is likely to be a serial killer, I'm afraid we're going to have to build quite a few more prisons.
We do not convict people on their character. Hired on the police procedure.
Attorneys Jean Iredale and Gretchen von Helms represent the Browns.
This was a violent, sadistic, choking killing. The scope of what happened to these poor young women who were brutally, sexually assaulted and murdered is quite different from going to a strip club or going into a porn shop or reading an off-color story.
The lawyers argue that there is almost no case against Kevin Brown. For starters, they say, investigators could never say if or when or how Kevin Brown, the mild-mannered criminalist, met Ronald Tatro, the violent, convicted rapist.
Zero evidence that they had ever seen each other or met at any time. Zero.
They say there are perfectly innocent explanations for Kevin Brown's actions and statements, like the one he made when detectives showed him a picture of Claire Huff.
He said at one point, "Oh, I remember her." Why did he say that?
It was a well-known case, and that photograph that they showed him had been one that had been in the newspaper.
But Brown also said he may have met someone named Claire in the 80s and that he might have had sex with her. Iredale says Brown was just being honest.
I think that he said he had met a Claire, but the Claire that he was talking about was a woman who was 30 years old.
Even the investigators seem to acknowledge in the affidavit that this woman did not sound like Claire Huff. But remember, Brown had allegedly also told a friend that he photographed a girl who was found dead on the beach.
The man to whom this statement is attributed says he never said such a thing.
Gretchen von Helms argues investigators had tunnel vision and interpreted everything Kevin Brown said as evidence of his guilt. She says that's what happened when Brown told the detective he had no idea Claire was 14.
They immediately think the suspicious, guilty version of that versus, oh my God, you're telling me this awful crime. A normal citizen, when they're told about this awful crime, would say, oh my gosh, this poor child was 14, how awful this is.
The attorneys admit Kevin Brown's personality did little to help him during the investigation.
He was one of the worst public speakers, let's say, in the history of the San Diego Police Department lab.
He was kind of like a nervous Nelly.
Retired criminalist John Dorina and Jim Stamm say Kevin Brown was, at best, a shaky witness for the police in court cases.
Whenever he got confronted, he got very nervous and very upset. He wanted to agree. He wanted to please them.
But Kevin Brown's shyness or awkwardness cannot explain his DNA on that swab. Several swabs were taken from inside Claire during the autopsy. The medical examiner tested one of them in 1984 and found nothing. Another swab was sent to the San Diego Police Department lab, and that's where the lawyers say the trouble began.
It was not kept in a way that would ensure the integrity of the evidence.
It was the early 80s, before much was known about DNA, and the procedures now used to prevent contamination did not exist.
How different were the procedures back then?
A lot. I mean, we didn't wear masks for sure.
Kevin Brown did not work on the Claire Huff case, but he worked near the criminalist who processed the evidence, including that swab where a minute amount of Brown's DNA was later found.
The swab itself was put to dry in the open air.
Without a cap.
On a table near where Mr. Brown worked. Everything that was able to be airborne could have gone and touched that swab.
The problem, though, with this case seems to me, that the allegation is that this isn't sweat or spit. It's his semen. How would his semen get on a swab?
You can still have cross-contamination of semen because they had to have fresh samples of semen in the San Diego lab.
At the time of Claire Huff's murder, criminalists would often bring their own seminal fluid to the lab and use it to ensure the chemicals used to detect semen were working correctly. Dorina and Stam believe that all the criminalists in the lab did it.
I think Kevin was doing that same thing.
The San Diego Police Department, however, insists that contamination was not possible. But the retired criminalists know what they saw.
Most likely, Kevin's semen standard was in that lab, and several analysts may have even had it. It may have been even used on that particular, on Ms. Huff's case.
We didn't switch gloves back then either. So let's say the analyst took Kevin's semen sample, wearing the same gloves, and then handled the deep vaginal swab. There's a logical explanation for the contamination.
Cross-contamination does happen. There have been cases of lab technicians' DNA ending up on evidence documented in several states and at least 4 other countries. So, given the lab procedures in effect at the time and the lack of other solid evidence, Kevin Brown was assured the case against him was weak.
And I believed that they lacked the evidence necessary to charge Mr. Kevin Brown with these murders.
But by mid-2014, the stress of the investigation, which was dragging on, was making Kevin Brown very anxious.
I said, call him and get it straightened out. And he said, they just said, you know you killed her, and you may as well confess. And he hung up the phone and he said, I didn't even say anything back to him, Beck, because I didn't know what else to say at this point. He said, I didn't do it and they're not going to ever believe me.
Rebecca hoped their nightmare would soon end, but it would not end in a way that anyone expected. On the morning of October 20th, 2014, Rebecca Brown came home from work and found her husband's Bible sitting on the table. In it, he had underlined a psalm about being wrongfully accused.
His watch was there and his cell phone was there. And so I asked my mother, where is Kevin? And she had just said, he went somewhere. He went out, he was cleaned up, he'd shaved, he'd showered, looked nice, and said, I have things to do.
Kevin didn't come home that night, and the following day, Rebecca got the news she feared most.
And I was just sitting there waiting, and then there was the door knock, and it was the detective. And he said, we've found your husband, and he's gone.
A ranger at a state park near where the Browns had a vacation cabin had found Kevin hanging from a tree.
Were you surprised, even after everything that he'd been through?
I tried to keep his spirits up.
You thought you had kept him safe. Oh my.
Yeah.
Rebecca Brown is adamant that her husband's suicide was not an admission of guilt.
I totally understand why he did it. He knew there would be people who would think even if he went to court and was found not guilty, that would believe it. And this was going to tarnish his reputation that he prided himself in.
He didn't escape that, of course. After he died, the police held a news conference.
Yeah.
3 days after his death, the San Diego Police Department publicly named Kevin Brown as one of 2 suspects in Claire Huff's murder.
We were able to establish a very strong case that Ronald Tatro and Kevin Brown were the suspects in the murder of Claire Huff, and also an arrest for Brown would be forthcoming.
You never had enough to arrest him in his lifetime, and now that he's gone, you're going to just say, he did it, case solved, it's done.
Rebecca has answered the police charges with charges of her own. She's filed suit against 2 police detectives for misconduct and wrongful death.
He was not a rapist and a killer. He was a quiet, good man, and I'm hoping the legal system will help set things right.
The San Diego Police Department refused our request for an interview, but Penny and Sam Huff, Claire's parents, have the answers they need.
We're confident in the San Diego Police Department and their discoveries.
The Huff family says after 30 years, the details surrounding their daughter's death are not as important to them as remembering her life.
We've learned to live with her death. We've learned to live without her physical presence in our family.
To us, what's important is what Claire was and what Claire meant to us and to the people around her.
And this is sort of a still life, I guess.
Yep, that's a 9th grade one.
Claire left her mother and father with a lot of memories.
Well, it looks like all her favorite rock groups.
And at 14, she had the foresight to leave a will telling her family and friends that she loved them and not to be sad.
You made me realize how precious and beautiful life is. Thank you. I wish I could list all the wonderful things you've done, but everyone would fall asleep. I love you both.
What did it mean to you that she had done this and she had written this?
It's always a puzzle why she did it, but it is also a treasure.
But the family of Barbara Nantes, the first victim in this case, still has as many questions about her murder as they did in 1978.
Reality, what happened to her, it's just so hard to think.
I want to know her. I want
to know
her
what
to
she
have
would
a
have done.
life.
Police now say Barbara and Claire's cases are not connected.
I would like a viable suspect, but we don't have one.
Ronald Tatro was in prison for rape at the time of Barbara's murder, and Kevin Brown was attending college in Sacramento, 500 miles away. Barbara's boyfriend, Jim Alt.
What has it done to you over the years, especially with the developments in Claire's case, to see this case still remain open?
It's devastating. We want answers. We want to know what they're doing to solve this.
Even today, Jim Alt says he's suffering from survivor's guilt. It has stayed with him, even though Barbara's father, Ralph, sent him a letter long ago apologizing for having blamed him for her death.
I want you to know that I don't hold you responsible for Barbara's death. When I was grieving over her death, I needed to blame someone, and since she was with you, I lashed out at you.
Jim, you were trying to be alone with Barbara is probably what every red-blooded American boy dreams of. Unfortunately, the time you spent together turned out to be a disaster, but the chance of that happening was probably 1 in a million. Yours truly, Ralph Nantes.
It still is hard for you to read that without choking up.
Yes, sir.
He's absolving you in a way. Does that help you?
When I first read it, it did, but you can't hide what happened. Because of a decision Barbara and I made, she never came home. So I own part of that decision, and I'll take that to the grave with me.
CBS next Saturday. 48 Hours brings you back-to-back episodes all summer long. Next week, Dressed to Kill.
The evil clowns you see in the movies, well, it came to life.
The public knew this man as the zombie hunter.
48 Hours crime time double feature next Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Because I know it. Do you know it? Come on, tell us. Who?
It's got to be horse racing.
Yes, I like
I mean, logically speaking, it can only be horse racing.
My name is Jane Dorotik. I spent 20 years in prison for a crime I did not commit. I thought truth and justice was at the front of everything. And it certainly has not been in my case. I wish I just knew what really happened. I wish there was some way to piece it together, somebody to come forward with the truth.
On February 13, 2000, Jane and Bob Dorotik are living together in North San Diego.
He said he was going out for a jog. That was it. That was the last I talked to him.
She reports her husband missing. There was a search for him as a missing person. The next day, he was found in a location 2 or 3 miles away from their home.
And I stopped about right here. I could see the body, and I said, this is Mr. Dorotik.
He was found to have blunt force trauma to his head. He was found to have injuries consistent with strangulation.
It was obvious to me that it was a homicide. They found Bob's blood in his bedroom. The detectives decided, because they saw some blood, that they were in the crime scene, and that Jane was the only one with access to that bedroom and to Bob. There was only one person that could have done this to Mr. Dorotik, and that was his wife, Jane Dorotik.
He said, "You're under arrest." I was like, what?
I would never hurt my husband.
Police say circumstantial and blood evidence links Jane Dorotik to her husband's murder.
The bedroom was not a crime scene.
I don't doubt that this occurred at the home, and I don't doubt that she's involved.
There was blood on the comforter. There was blood on the pillow sham. There was blood on the headboard.
When you have a home that's a working ranch, you're gonna find blood around.
It's just problem on top of problem on top of problem.
I would declare this crime scene very contaminated.
They focused on one person and turned a blind eye to anything else.
Jane Dorotik chose murder over divorce.
It felt like a nightmare, and I kept saying, when am I going to wake up?
Do you believe that Jane Dorotik got a fair trial?
No, I don't.
I'm in no position to say who did what. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what happened to that man.
What do you believe happened to Bob?
I believe Bob somehow fell into some kind of situation. I don't know. I lost my husband, and then I lost my freedom.
Jane, how would you describe what the last 22 years have been like for you?
It's been torturous in many ways. I suppose many moments when I thought, how do I keep going? I always used to say this is the most peaceful place on the face of the earth. Nothing feels peaceful anymore.
When we first met Jane Dorotik in 2000,
the stress of all of it on everyone has been incredible.
The life she had once found so serene in the foothills outside of San Diego, a life she had shared with her husband Bob, had taken an unimaginable turn.
How can this be? How can this happen? Surely I'll wake up and it's a dream.
Jane had become the prime suspect in Bob's murder. Authorities believe that she viciously attacked him in their home.
I certainly didn't do this. I loved my husband.
Jane, 53 years old at the time, and Bob, 55, shared more than half their lives together.
I was 23 when we were married. Bob was a wonderful, loving, creative person.
And welcome everyone here, those who've been here before and those who haven't.
Bob spent most of his career as an engineer. Jane worked as a nurse and later as an executive in the healthcare industry. The couple raised 3 children, Alex, Claire, and Nick.
The family has always been incredibly important to both of us.
Also important to Jane were their horses. While Jane's passion was breeding and riding,
I'm having a good old time here.
Bob was an avid jogger, and that, says Jane, is the last image she has of her husband.
Bob was sitting actually in this chair, facing the TV.
Although Jane was under suspicion, she allowed us into her home.
He said he was going out for a jog, and he was actually had his jogging suit on, was tying his shoes. That was the last I talked to him.
It was around 1 p.m. on February 13, 2000, when Jane says Bob left to go for that run. As hours passed without any word from him, Jane says she grew concerned.
It was beginning to get dark. I decided to go out and look.
This is the route Jane says she took to search for Bob, driving up and down the hill where he sometimes ran. By 7:45 p.m., Jane's concern turned to fear.
I said, enough, this is enough, something is wrong. And that's when I made the call to the sheriff's department.
My first thought that night was maybe this man had a heart attack and fell down the embankment along Lake Wolford Road.
As Deputy James Blackman and others from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department searched for Bob, concerned friends and family gathered at the Dorotik house.
The minute I saw my mom's face, I knew right away something terrible had happened.
The Dorotik's daughter, Claire, 24 at the time, had spent the weekend visiting her aunt and returned home to a distraught Jane.
She was freaked out. She was scared, she was nervous, she was crying.
It was a horrifying feeling that got more and more horrifying when he wasn't found.
And then in the pre-dawn hours of February 14th, Deputy Blackman turned into this driveway several miles from the Dorotik home and noticed a body off the road.
At this point, I could see the shirt, the pants, and he was laying on his back.
From Jane's description, he immediately knew it was Bob Dorotik.
I got there a little after 7 in the morning.
San Diego County Sheriff's Detective Rick Empson was called to the scene.
There was no evidence of any type of vehicle accident.
The evidence Empson did find suggested something else.
I could see that he had blood on his face. There was blood near the back of his head. And I could see that there was a rope around his neck.
Bob Dorotik had been bludgeoned and strangled. The one-time missing person case had turned into a homicide investigation.
Is there anybody you could think who would want to see your husband dead?
Nobody. Nobody.
As law enforcement asked Jane questions about Bob, she let them into her home.
Come in, search, look for anything.
Detective Empson noticed a piece of rope hanging from the porch that caught his attention, thinking he had just seen something similar on Bob Dorotik.
It appeared to be the exact same type of rope that was found around his neck. The sliding glass door going into the master bedroom.
And when investigators got to Bob and Jane's bedroom, they found something more troubling. They believed they were looking at blood spatter.
There was no question in our mind that this assault occurred in the master bedroom.
They documented their findings in this diagram, taking photos along the way of what they believed to be blood on various items in the bedroom and of what appeared to be a large blood stain on the underside of the mattress.
I do know when Bob had a nosebleed, he made a comment about getting some blood on the mattress.
Jane says there was a logical explanation for some of the other blood, too. They had dogs who were injured and had bled.
This little dog had an abscess on her cheek that was openly draining at the time, and little drops of blood we'd find as she sat on the couch. The carpet pieces are what the detectives removed, feeling that there was blood on the carpet.
The spots of blood investigators said they found all over the bedroom surprised Jane.
Do you have any other explanation of how that blood spatter could have gotten there?
Not really.
On the ceiling, on the window, on the walls?
No.
Adding to authorities' suspicions was this bloody syringe found in the bathroom garbage. Jane told us she used it to medicate her horses.
I know that I give the horses shots all the time. If you go look in my fridge right now, you'll find horse syringes.
Investigators theorize that Jane hit her husband with an object in the bedroom and strangled him. She then dressed him in his jogging suit, put him in their truck, and dumped him along the side of the road where his body was found.
Why do they believe you killed your husband?
You know, I guess I've been through that one.
a billion times. I don't know.
But investigators thought they knew, believing the motive was money and escaping a troubled marriage. Jane was the main breadwinner, and they learned the couple had split up for a year in 1997.
I don't make any apologies for the fact that we had rough times, but that doesn't change the fact that we loved each other.
And that love, says Jane, is why they reconciled. They have been back living together as a couple for a year and a half before Bob was killed.
I really think the separation caused us to really regroup and think about what was important.
They were getting along better than they ever had in the past. I was living there. I can tell you that.
But law enforcement was unmoved, and 3 days after Bob Dorotik's body was found, Jane was arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
I know I didn't do this. I know there's a killer out there, but how am I going to clear myself?
She's baffled because I don't think she knows what happened.
Released on bail, Jane started preparing her defense, hiring attorney Carrie Steigerwalt.
She knows that she's placed as the killer, and she's not the killer.
And at trial, Jane's attorney would present a surprise suspect who he felt was responsible for Bob Dorotik's murder.
I know that I'm innocent, but I don't have any more faith in the legal system. I believe I could be convicted for something that I didn't do, and that's very scary.
While Jane worried about her outcome at trial, Claire Dorotik was much more confident about her mother's chances.
My mom could not have done this crime. She didn't have the motive and she didn't have the opportunity.
But when the case went to trial in 2001, a year after the murder, prosecutor Bonnie Howard Regan described the Dorotik's marriage as seriously troubled and told jurors that Jane didn't want to pay Bob alimony in a divorce.
Bob Dorotik never went jogging, and he never left that residence alive.
According to the state, Bob had actually been killed Saturday night, nearly a day before Jane reported him missing. The autopsy performed by Dr. Christopher Swalwell showed undigested food consistent with what Jane said they had for dinner that night.
Are you able to give us an estimate of how long after Mr. Dorotik ate, how long after that he was killed?
Yes, it was very shortly after he ate. I would say it was probably within a couple of hours.
And he wasn't killed on the side of the road, the prosecutor said. There wasn't enough blood there. Instead, she said Bob's blood was all over the bedroom. Lead detective Rick Empson testified he had asked Jane to explain that.
She'd indicated initially that she had a dog that had been bleeding, and then indicated that approximately a week prior, Bob had a bloody nose over in the corner by the stove, and that Bob had cleaned it up.
There was evidence someone cleaned the bedroom. The carpet next to the potbelly stove and tiled floor was wet and had blood stains underneath.
Did any of the blood from his nosebleed go on the carpet?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where?
Mm-hmm. Right next to the tile, because I'm the one that helped him clean it.
Authorities dismissed Jane's explanations. Their theory was that Jane hit Bob in the head in their bedroom with an object while he was lying in bed, although they never identified or found any weapon. Charles Merritt, a criminalist and bloodstain pattern analyst for the San Diego County Sheriff's Crime Lab, recounted 20 locations where he saw bloodstains.
On one of the pillows, on a lamp, this particular nightstand on the potbelly stove was on the ceiling itself and then on the underside of the mattress.
The jury was also shown this evidence of tire tracks found near Bob's body. The state's expert, Anthony DiMaria, said he matched the 3 different types of tires on Dorotik's truck.
Are you saying the measurements taken at the scene were equal to the measurements taken off the actual vehicle?
Yes.
The most telling evidence connecting Jane to the murder, according to the prosecutor, was that syringe found in the bathroom. It had traces of a horse tranquilizer inside, and even though there was no evidence that Bob had been injected with anything, it had Bob's blood and a bloody fingerprint on it.
The evidence will show that the fingerprint on this syringe was Jane Dorotik's.
Can you explain that?
I can't really explain it other than I know that I helped Bob clean up a nosebleed. And if that's the same time when I took the syringes and threw them in the trash, and there was some blood on my hand, that could have made that happen.
But perhaps the most powerful witnesses were the Dorotik's two sons, Nick and Alex. They both testified against their mother.
Did you say anything specifically about the syringe?
Well, I asked her how it got there and what it was doing there.
And what was your mother's response?
She said that her biggest fear in all of this was that us family members would start questioning her.
Your mother always settled things logically? Tried to?
No.
You wouldn't agree with that statement?
Nope. It would be my mom basically saying, this is what you have to accept. And then my dad would either accept it or there would be threats of divorce or something. That's what I remember from growing up.
Jane's attorneys, Carrie Steigerwalt and Cole Casey, admitted it was a big blow.
Would you say that's been the most damaging testimony?
Yeah. It's not what they said, it's the fact that they were there testifying for the prosecution.
When it came time for the defense to present its case, Steigerwalt actually agreed with the prosecution on a major point, that the murder took place in the bedroom. But he had a jaw-dropping alternative suspect, Claire Dorotik.
Ladies and gentlemen, Claire hated her father.
He claimed Claire, an avid horsewoman, hated her father because he threatened to sell the animals she loved and suggested that she was capable of murder.
That's what Claire is. A hot-tempered, explosive individual.
It was a risky strategy that Jane reluctantly agreed to.
All I can do is trust what Carrie says is the best way to go.
Are you at all concerned that the jury will wonder about a woman who would allow herself to be defended by pointing the finger at her daughter? Could that work against the two of you?
It may, I don't know. I think it is the most viable defense, and I think it's supported by the best evidence.
Steigerwalt insisted Jane wasn't physically able to commit the murder, but Claire was.
She runs marathons, and she's a personal trainer. She is as fit a woman as you will see at the age of 24.
But remember, Claire and her aunt said they were together 2 hours away.
They call the aunt. That's the extent of the investigation on the alibi of Claire Dorotik.
Would Miss Claire Dorotik please step forward?
That alibi is nonsense.
You are going to assert your Fifth Amendment rights? Correct.
The jurors never heard from Claire or Jane, who chose not to testify. But they did hear from a woman who said she thought she saw Bob the day he disappeared, sitting between two men in a black pickup truck, not far from where his body was found.
Who killed Robert Dorotik? Was it Claire Dorotik? Or, ladies and gentlemen, was it someone else?
In his closing argument, Steigerwalt accused investigators of dismissing witnesses like that woman and focusing only on Jane.
The prosecution had focused on one person, and that's not the way to conduct an investigation. It's not the way to run a case.
Jane Dorotik and Bob Dorotik were the only two people in that home that weekend.
Bonnie Howard Regan says there's no need to investigate further when you have sufficient evidence.
They searched that bedroom, and they saw all the blood, and they knew that was the crime scene. What more investigation do they need to do?
It took the jury 4 days to return a verdict.
We, the jury, in the above titled cause, find the defendant, Jane Marguerite Dorotik, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree in violation of Penal Code Section 1.
Did Jane Dorotik get a fair trial?
No. No. Because fairness means that you're presenting things accurately, and it appears like it was not done accurately.
Juror number 8? Yes. Juror number 9?
Yes.
Juror number 10?
Yes.
Go behind the scenes with the 48 Hours Postmortem Podcast.
It almost didn't register for a minute. It's like, no, this can't be. I was so certain that I was walking out. I thought they would see the truth.
Jane Dorotik never imagined she'd be found guilty.
It's hard to keep going.
At the time of her conviction for the murder of her husband, she was 54 years old and sentenced to 25 years to life.
I mean, I can't see my way clear to a life in prison. I just can't see it.
Determined to prove the jury got it wrong, Jane became her own advocate, working on her case for many years. We spoke with Jane again 2 decades later about her efforts.
All through my prison journey, I continued to write all innocence projects I could think of, asking for help. At the same time, realized that I had to fight for myself.
Jane filed motions from prison, citing such issues as insufficient evidence and ineffective assistance of counsel.
I would describe my defense as limited and inadequate.
In her filings, Jane indicated that she wanted to testify at her trial, but had left that decision up to her attorney, and that had she testified, she could have explained Bob's stomach contents, stating that he sometimes ate leftovers from the previous night. She also described her attorney's alternate suspect theory, pointing to her daughter Claire as the killer, as absurd. Do you believe that your daughter Claire had anything to do with the death of her
Absolutely, unequivocally not. And my defense attorney, everybody knew she was away for that weekend.
In regard to that defense strategy, Claire later wrote in a book, "How could I be angry at my mother when all I did was worry about her?" Jane's lawyer, whom we interviewed at the time of her trial, did not speak with us again.
That was the worst strategy of my life, ever. I said to my attorney, if anything happens to Claire, I'm going to stand up and say I did it.
In her filings, Jane also questioned why her defense attorney accepted the bad forensics pointing to the bedroom as the murder scene, rather than presenting other scenarios as to where and how Bob Dorotik could have been murdered. Did the defense too easily accept the bedroom as a crime scene?
That is a very legitimate argument.
CBS News consultant Matthew Troiano, a former prosecutor and current defense attorney, was not involved in the Dorotik case, but he reviewed some of the court documents at our request.
The defense made a strategic decision. Are we going to dispute that a crime happened in this location, or are we essentially going to concede that it happened there and then come up with a different narrative of how it happened there? And they chose the latter.
And that decision, Troiano says, likely led the defense to point the finger at Claire for the murder.
They had to blame somebody else for something that happened in a specific location. And they, at least as it relates to the daughter, went back to her having some disagreement with her father about something. And it was a risk.
Have you ever seen that kind of defense?
You don't see it. I mean, you could happen when there are clear facts and evidence to support it, but when there are none, that's a showstopper.
And in fact, Claire was never charged with any wrongdoing in connection to her father's murder. The defense accepting the bedroom as the murder scene is especially puzzling to Troiano, as there were reports from several eyewitnesses who said they saw a man jogging that day, accounts consistent with Jane's depiction of events, not the prosecution's.
That's critical evidence.
And all of that was really not pursued. And I didn't know of all of the witnesses. Had there been a thorough investigation initially, all of that would have come out.
Through the years in filings, Jane raised problems with the entire case against her, arguing that authorities focused on her from the very beginning of the investigation and failed to follow other investigative leads. But motion after motion was denied. And regarding Jane's ineffective counsel claims, the judge rejected them all, ruling that her attorney's performance was not deficient and that his actions had not affected the outcome of the case.
There were many moments where I doubted, when is this ever going to turn around? Many, many moments.
Still, Jane didn't give up. She continued looking for new evidence to clear her, especially as DNA testing became more advanced. In 2012, she filed a petition for DNA testing of that rope found around Bob's neck and other items, like Bob's fingernail clippings, which had been saved but never tested. And in 2015, the motion was granted.
Is that unusual that she finally even got testing based on her filing motions on her own?
Yes, it's very atypical.
It was at this time that Jane finally got the attention of a wrongful conviction group, Loyola Law School's Project for the Innocent.
I get this wonderful letter from Loyola saying, you've contacted us and we're interested in your case. And after that, Loyola took over, got the testing done.
And what that testing revealed, as well as a fresh examination of other evidence, would change the course of the case.
That's really what flips the script to say that there's more here. This is more than just an inadequate investigation. There is a different narrative that's running through these test results. There is physical evidence that another person could be involved. When you talk about the evidence in this case, the subsequent testing reveals that you might have a different explanation for things that really shed light on what may have happened here.
Jane Dorotik spent years behind bars asking for a new examination of the evidence used to convict her of her husband Bob's murder. Now, working with a team from Loyola Project for the Innocent, the court allowed them to have new DNA testing on items such as the rope found around Bob Dorotik's neck, his fingernails, and clothing. Appeal filings state that foreign male DNA was found on several items.
The results of that, none of my DNA anywhere.
There is physical evidence from fingernail clippings, from a rope, from his clothing that is foreign to Jane.
The team from Loyola Project for the Innocent declined to be interviewed. We asked Nathan Lentz, a professor of biology and forensic science at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who was not involved in the case, to review court documents about new evidence, such as the DNA on the rope.
While they didn't get a profile that would be good enough to search a database or even match to a suspect, they did get enough DNA that is not attributable to Bob or to Jane.
But while Jane and her team believed the results pointed to her innocence, the state came to a different conclusion, stating in filings the DNA obtained was too low level to make any reliable interpretation. Lentz agrees the DNA levels were low, but he believes it was enough to exclude Jane, and that the absence of Jane's DNA on the rope, as well as under Bob's fingernails or on his clothing, is significant.
With the theory of crime that they presented, you would expect a lot of Jane's DNA on Bob, and if she had moved his body, there's a lot of DNA transfer that might have taken place there. That wasn't found.
The appellate team also reviewed the bedroom blood evidence the prosecutor told the jury was fully tested and was Bob's.
Now, the evidence will show that all this blood that has been described to you, the observations made in this bedroom, It was all sent out for DNA analysis, and it all came back Bob Dorotik's blood.
But according to the appeal, not every single spot in the bedroom believed to be blood was tested. Instead, representative samples were tested.
There were cases where just simply one swab with a control was taken, and it was representative of a variety of spots. That's not good practice. It just invites misinterpretations.
When you're talking about blood spatter and you're trying to analyze how it got there, you need to do a fairly comprehensive test to be able to draw the conclusion that you're drawing.
But I think the prosecution could argue you can't afford to test, can you? Every single drop that looks like blood?
Right? But when you say we did everything, and that's not accurate, that's where the problem lies.
In fact, the appellate team says that several blood-like stains on items, including a pillow sham, the nightstand, a lampshade, turned out not to be blood. And there were those stains on the bedspread, which criminalist Charles Merritt pointed to at trial and described as Bob's blood.
Two of the actual stains circled by little red dots.
Jane's lawyers learned those particular spots were never tested at all. And due to improper storage, the bedspread could not be tested again.
So we don't know that it was blood at all.
The handling of the evidence over the course of the entire investigation was also raised on appeal.
This one is hard to even look at. You have an investigator who definitely should know better, handling murder evidence with his bare hands. In addition to obviously depositing his own DNA all around this crime scene, he's also risking transferring evidence from among the various spots that he's collecting.
And there's that syringe with Bob's blood and Jane's fingerprint found in the bathroom garbage, something the appellate team and Lentz thought could be explained.
And if you throw that syringe in the garbage can, Bob throws a bloody Kleenex in that garbage can, they could transfer. Transfer of DNA from one object to another in a trash can is not unexpected.
Lentz feels the fact that the syringe was even found in the garbage points fingers away from Jane.
If you're cleaning up after a murder, you won't leave the bloody syringe in the waste basket.
But the state stood by its original investigation, maintaining the bedroom was the murder scene, stating that the evidence still points to Jane Dorotik as the killer, and that the defense arguments are largely derived from speculation and misstatements of fact. Jane's appellate team, though, maintains the bedroom did not even look like a crime scene, something Lentz also believes.
There is not a consistent pattern to the evidence that indicates a violent bludgeoning that took place in that bedroom. If Bob were alive today and investigators had walked in his room, no one would say, oh, this looks like someone was murdered here.
If you just look at all of the pieces of evidence that Loyola was able to absolutely take apart, and yet we know what was told to the jury in the original conviction. So how can that happen?
As her attorneys reviewed evidence, Jane Dorotik in 2020 was temporarily and conditionally let out of prison due to COVID health concerns. The question now became, was the new evidence her lawyers were finding enough to make her release permanent?
What do you think about the new DNA test results? Chat now with Erin Moriarty on X.
In the summer of 2020, Jane Dorotik and her team hoped a court would overturn the jury's verdict, turning her temporary release from prison into lasting freedom. What were their major points?
The testing that was done initially was insufficient. The way that that testing was presented to the jury was inaccurate. There were a number of different arguments that they made.
A hearing was scheduled, but then suddenly the state requested an unplanned virtual hearing.
The people are willing to concede petitioner's new evidence claim.
The prosecution admitted what Jane's lawyers had argued all along.
the DNA evidence as it exists now in 2020 is much different in quality and quantity than presented at trial in 2001.
That the new DNA test results, as well as issues with how the sheriff's crime lab handled evidence, cast doubt on the verdict. But what came next was even more unexpected. The state requested that Jane's murder conviction be overturned, and the judge agreed.
I'm going to grant the motion for the writ.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I always believed that at some point the truth would come out.
But Jane's ordeal wasn't over. 3 months later, in another shocking move, the DA's office decided to retry her.
I don't think any of us thought that San Diego County would attempt to retry me, but they did.
The state believes that she did this and they want to pursue it.
But in order to retry her, the prosecution first had to demonstrate to the judge that there was still enough evidence to prove Jane killed Bob, despite the new DNA results and the questions about the initial testing.
We are back on the record. All parties.
Then you have this battle in court. If you're conceding that there were problems, how are you going to do it again, essentially, with the same evidence?
It was astounding to sit in that courtroom and see what they try and put forward as actual evidence, and then also thrilling to see my team take it apart.
Do you solemnly state that the
Jane's attorneys questioned the credibility of several of the state's experts, including Charles Merritt of the Sheriff's Crime Lab. The judge ultimately ruled that the new trial could go ahead, but that some key evidence presented in her original trial would not be admissible, including those tire tracks near where Bob's body was found that were linked to Jane's truck.
You have a number of different trucks that could be consistent with those tire tracks. It's, in essence, kind of junk science-y.
In May 2022, just as jury selection was about to begin, the prosecution surprised everyone yet again.
Remain seated and come to order. This courtroom is now in session.
We go into court as the jury is assembled and ready to come into the courtroom Monday morning, and everything's changed.
We no longer feel that the evidence is sufficient to show proof beyond a reasonable doubt and convince 12 members of the jury, so we are requesting the court dismiss the charges at this time. Thank you.
Ms. Dorotik, you are free to go, and good luck to you, ma'am.
It is overwhelming to realize that now I can determine my own future. It's something I've prayed for and hoped for.
After the hearing, Jane's attorneys spoke about her decades-long fight.
Jane's dignity in standing up and stoically fighting for her innocence against every risk and every threat. That's why this case got dismissed today, and as far as we're concerned, we're moving on.
The district attorney's office and sheriff's department declined to speak with 48 Hours. The case against Jane Dorotik was dismissed without prejudice, which means if new evidence surfaces, charges could be brought again someday.
But then doesn't that leave still a shadow over Jane Dorotik?
Oh, sure, it does. I mean, there's no question about it. From a practical perspective, do I think it's over? Yeah, I think it's over. But from a legal perspective, no.
Jane Dorotik is working to rebuild her life after spending nearly 2 decades in prison.
My entire family has been blown apart by this hurricane of events. It's been heartbreaking on so many levels.
Claire Dorotik did not respond to our request for comment, but Jane says they are still close. Her son Nick died in 2023. Alex Dorotik did not provide a comment to 48 Hours, but according to filings by the state, he remains convinced his mother killed his father.
Do you have hope that your family will come together at some point?
Of course I do. Of course I have hope.
Jane also has hope that she could make a difference in other people's lives as she works with advocacy groups that help incarcerated women.
To me, it's not just about my story. And yes, we can all sit here and say, this is so horrendous, and how did this happen to this woman? But unless we look systemically, how many others are we going to find? And to me, that's critically important.
Many unanswered questions about this case remain, including, perhaps, the most important one.
What happened here? We don't know what happened to Bob Dorotik. Where's justice for Bob? Where's justice for Robert Dorotik?
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Postmortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.